This is Dateline News and Conversation. My guest tonight, returning to the show, and he's going to be a regular, Edward Curtin. Uh, he's written a book that has really had a profound influence on me and impact. It's called Searching for Truth in a Country of Lies. He was on a week or so ago, and we talked about this book. We're going to delve a lot deeper into many of his articles that he's written over the years that are compiled in this wonderful book. I would encourage everybody to get a copy of it. It's on Kindle, Searching for Truth in a Country of Lies. The title of the chapter in the book that we're going to talk about tonight is this: The Satanic nature of the atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki on August 6th and 9th, 1945. I was there on the 72nd anniversary of the bombing, and it was a profound experience for me. I was very moved. But to start, I want to read the first paragraph or two from Ed's book, or Ed's article, The Satanic Nature of the Atomic Bombings. Here it is. American history can only be accurately described as the story of demonic possession, however you choose to understand that phrase. Maybe radical evil will suffice. But right from the start, the American colonizers were involved in massive killing because they considered themselves divinely blessed and guided, a chosen people whose mission would come to be called manifest destiny. Nothing stood in the way of this divine calling, which involved the need to enslave and kill millions and millions of innocent people, that continues down to today. Others have always been expendable, since they have stood in the way of the imperial march ordained by the American God. Ed, welcome back to the show.
Thank you, Regis. I'm happy to be here, of course.
Well, your articles in this book, Searching for Truth in a Country of Lies, have resonated very deeply with me. And over the next few weeks and months, I hope to dig further down into some of your writings, because they really are profound. You have a way of connecting history and people throughout history with some very deep philosophical and spiritual reflections. So let's start tonight, Ed, with what you wrote about August 6th and 9th, 1945, Hiroshima and Nagasaki, and calling it radical evil.
Well, sure. That's what it was, in my opinion, and I think in the opinion of many people around the world. It was a continuation, of course, of the U.S. firebombing of Tokyo and almost every Japanese city that killed hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of thousands of Japanese. And that was radical evil as well, just as the firebombing of Cologne and other German cities by the United States Air Force was. And in the case of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, clearly there was absolutely no need for it. Some argue that it would save American soldiers' lives. I think that is a bogus argument. It was then, and it is now. And I've looked very closely into that. It's not that the Japanese were not very barbarous in their treatment of American prisoners of war. Again, this is war, and it's just horrendous stuff. But the United States, I think, clearly used the atomic weapons on those 2 Japanese cities, killing all those civilians and causing so much suffering for years and years and years and years, to send a message to the Soviet Union that we had these weapons and you had better watch out because we'll do it to you too. And so it served a so-called dual purpose, but there's no other word for it but evil. And again, when I say satanic, I'm not talking about a little man with horns and a tail. I'm talking about the inclination in the hearts of human beings to do evil. And we, as people, we have a choice between doing good and doing evil, following our better natures, or committing these abominations. And it's the same story of American history. You study it closely and you weep if you have a conscience. Killing all the native peoples, invading every country all over the world, just slaughtering people, millions and millions and millions of people. And, it's the so-called manifest destiny, the city on a hill, all that crap that American leaders have been spouting for so long. I remember vividly when President Obama was really into that stuff, always talking about our destiny and God's on our side. Yeah, well, as Bob Dylan sings, if God's on our side, he'll stop the next war. Ha ha, So it just seems to be a thread that runs through all of American history.
Well, I have talked about this, and I've had it in a couple of my films. You talk about the city on the hill. There's the famous quote, which I think the chickens have come home to roost, from John Winthrop. And I'm going to quote that. For we must consider that we shall be as a city on a hill. The eyes of all people are upon us, so that if we shall deal falsely with our God in this work we have undertaken, and so cause him to withdraw his present help from us, we shall be made a story and a byword throughout the world. And isn't this what we've become this present day?
Yes, absolutely. It is what we have become. And it's so deeply rooted in American history and American religious history as well. I live in Western Massachusetts, and I'm in the stomping grounds of so many of these former ministers who would promote this kind of stuff. Of course, also in the stomping grounds of dissidents who fought against it. But it runs very, very, very deep. And oftentimes, even those theologians who allegedly argued against it were very subtly promoting it. I don't need to name names, but that is, part of our history.
Yeah. And I really like the way you described evil or satanic, not as the devil, this figure of a creature with horns and a tail, but as something within us. And we do have the ability to choose between good and evil. I have called what's happening in the world today and throughout the history of the United States as evil. I don't know that there's another term that can describe what it is. Now, you talked about the firebombing of Cologne and Dresden and Tokyo and most of the cities in Japan during World War II. The infamous General Curtis LeMay was behind all of that. It was his strategy. And he said, and I quote him in my film, if you kill enough of them, they quit fighting. And isn't that exactly what the United States has done, at least in our lifetime, Ed, from Korea to Vietnam, right to the present day?
Yes, indeed, it sure is. And Curtis LeMay, you by the way, you may know this, made sure that he was at the so-called autopsy of President John Kennedy. And he sat there in the bleachers, so-called bleachers, within the huge autopsy room and puffed on his big fat cigar and gloated over the fact that his arch enemy, a man who was radically changed in his lifetime as president and was pushing for peace, was assassinated by the CIA and the American military establishment. And he was an example of pure evil. Well, pure evil, that's probably an exaggeration. There's some good in everyone, I suppose. But he was really an evil man.
Well, I have described him as the personification of evil.
Yeah.
Responsible for all of those deaths, and there's really been hundreds of thousands of them in Japan at that time, but over the years, the people that have died of that atomic poisoning, nuclear poisoning, and all the related illnesses and sicknesses that have come with it. I met many of those people. I met survivors when I was there. And anyway, I want to, let's continue to examine why it is that most Americans cannot accept the truth about the history of their country. Let's talk a little bit about why do you think that is the case, Ed, that they just can't get their arms around it?
Well, I think for a number of reasons, and I'm trying to explore this in another piece of writing, to explore it in deeper detail. But I think that a lot of it is education. Americans are taught in their schools from an early age, as I was. I remember I went to a Catholic grammar school, St. Brendan's, in the Bronx, where I learned a lot and I got a good fundamental education. But I remember seeing newsreels at school, and it was all anti-communist propaganda. And it had a deep effect on me, I'm sure, just like the other kids. And you go through high school and college for the most part, unless you're lucky, and you're fed a false narrative of what the history of the country is. And this, I think, has a huge effect on people. They simply never learned it. Howard Zinn, of course, wrote a book called a well-known book called The People's History of the United States, in which Howard tried to, he did. I mean, he educated many people, and it's a wonderful book, and he did great work as a historian of this stuff. But most people don't read it, and most people don't know. And then there's the issue of most people really don't care because they've been controlled from a very young age within concentric circles of social control, beginning at birth and within their families. And all of this is passed down from one generation to another. We're the good people. We have to defend ourselves against the bad people. And those people were native peoples here in the United States. I mean, this is all around here where I live in Western Massachusetts and in Massachusetts as a whole. The fight against the Indians, who were such savages, not unlike us white people. So I think there are multiple reasons, and I think that people just don't want to step out of bounds. They want to be they don't say it this way, but they want to be conventional people. They want to be comfortable. They want to live comfortable lives. They want to, be part of the shopping consumerist culture. They want to be distracted because it's very difficult to accept. It's painful. It hurts. It sets your mind and soul ablaze with tears, really. And I think people just want to turn away. They just don't want to see it. But it's there.
I think people of our generation certainly have experienced what you were talking about, the very same thing. And it goes much deeper than what we were taught in the educational system. My goodness, my undergraduate degree was in United States history. Everything that we read and memorized was glorifying this wonderful past of the United States, all of its victories, its growth, spreading freedom and democracy around the world. But I've reflected on this too, Ed, and we were conditioned by social events, 4th of July parades, Independence Day. America was this great country, this good country. And, we won World War II. And if you went to the movie theaters, those clips that we saw back in those days, the late 40s and early 50s, were all these black and white movies about America's victories in Europe and in the Pacific, and glorifying us and demonizing the Japanese and the Germans. I mean, that was so powerful, especially in the minds of little kids. And I'm sure it's very similar in adults. And then I think even in our religious upbringing, I can remember going to church. On one side of the altar was a papal flag, and the other side was an American flag.
Yeah.
I mean, it was everywhere. The symbolism. I went to Catholic grade school in Well, and we did the Pledge of Allegiance every day. And you talk about how we looked at the Indians. I can remember playing cowboys and Indians, and the Cowboys, we always won if we were out playing that. And you watched it on television. I mean, the Indian was always a Tonto, And you know, whether it was Daniel Boone or whoever we were watching on television, the Indians were portrayed as evil savages, as you mentioned. So when you put all of this together, it's an overwhelming, really, in a sense, a really sixth sense, beautiful picture that they drummed into our heads. And
Yes.
as you were saying, it's so difficult and painful for people to accept the alternative, the Howard Zinn story, your stories, my stories, uh, countless other people, some well known and others not so very well known, trying to counter this narrative, which is demonic. Um, you know, you also said, and you wrote in this article, as a nation, we are killers of the innocent. We are conscienceless. We are brutal. We are in the grip of evil forces. And you ask, is this not radical evil, demonic? Ed, we don't have to look to the past anymore. We can look to the very present of what the United States is doing, continuing to kill innocent people around the world, whether it be Latin America, whether it be the Middle East, where we have just ravaged the Middle East and killed millions of lives in Iraq, in Libya. Oh my God, what we've done to Libya, uh, what we've done to Syria, these ancient cultures. Uh, and when you look at what the United States is doing now, they call it a proxy war in Ukraine against Russia. I claim this is a decades-long war since Harry Truman dropped the bomb to tell Stalin when the Soviets were in charge. Russophobia, as you write, is nothing new. They've been trying to take down the Soviet Union, what is now Russia, for all of this time, and they are allowing so many lives to be lost in Ukraine. And then you look at the other side of the world, China. The United States is considering China its most threatening enemy and sending all these warships and fleets to the Pacific, the pivot to Asia. Um, this is, I think, Ed, evil. And almost every day, those people in the United States, and the ones that are in Washington now in the administration didn't invent this. This has been this neocon policy for many decades now. Um, it really is, I think, evil. Your thoughts on that and how you covered that in your book?
Well, you mentioned this war against Russia. It goes back, much further than Harry Truman in that period of time. It goes back to the early days of the 20th century. Most Americans never heard of the fact that the United States invaded or sent troops into Russia, the Soviet Union, in I believe it was 1917 and 18 to oppose the Bolshevik Revolution and the establishment of the USSR. So it goes back far, far, far in terms of oil warfare against Russia, the Soviet Union, and up to the present day. If I could just take you to another spot here, I would recommend that we were talking about how you and I were educated, so to speak, or propagandized about how great this country is and how the Japs, you know, they called them the Japs. They were these derogatory names for the Germans, for the Japanese, for everyone. But I would highly recommend that people watch the whole movie, but at least the beginning of Oliver Stone's movie about Ron Kovic called Born on the 4th of July. And if you watch that movie, and especially the beginning, you see how a young boy, Ron Kovic, played by the well-known actor.
Was it Tom Cruise?
Yeah, Tom Cruise. A great performance by Tom Cruise, who's not one of my favorites, but that was a tremendous performance. And it shows how you grow up in a small town. He grows up on Long Island in New York, and there's a parade, and you know he grows up in this Catholic family, and you know ultimately goes into the Marines. He's in the Marines, and those opening scenes tell it all. I mean, it's a masterpiece of filmmaking, I think, and Oliver has been doing this in film after film down through the years. And if we talk about people trying to re-educate the American people, Oliver Stone is at the head of the list in so many ways, in my opinion. With his films, they're quite uncanny, including his new stuff on the JFK assassination.
Yeah. You know, I know that you are friends with Oliver Stone. I met him when I was completing The Ghost of Jeju. I went down with a film crew to Washington, D.C., where he was giving a talk with Peter Kuznick, his partner in that history, what the heck, Untold History of the United States.
Yeah.
And he told me at the time that he was not fully aware of what was going on in Korea. And so anyway, he played a small role in the film, but a major role in the trailer. And a funny anecdote, he asked me, he said, "What's the name of the film going to be?" And I said, "Well, I'm not sure, but I think it's going to be Jeju in the Crosshairs of War Again." And he blurted out, "That sucks." And this is coming from an Academy Award winner, you know, with incredible movies. But
yeah.
I have to agree, Oliver has made some incredible movies. He did that whole series in Central and South America.
Yeah.
And the good thing about filmmaking, and for somebody like Oliver, not like me, because my films don't get into theaters, millions of people see his films around the world. And so when Oliver speaks, whether you like him or not, at least people are listening and getting exposed to it. And, you know, he did that series of interviews with Vladimir Putin, which cost him a great deal back in the United States, you know, as a Putin lover. He told me he had a hard time raising money after that. And then he did that film. He did that film, Ukraine on Fire. He produced it, but he was very much involved in the creation of it.
Right.
And so I'm going to use him as an example now, because it's something else that you wrote in this article in the book. When you find the truth, you cannot remain silent. You have an obligation to speak out. Tell me a little bit about that particular thought in your book and where that came from.
Well, it just comes out of me, I guess, out of who I am, who I've always been from my early days. I think it comes out of my spirit, my soul, my upbringing. Not that it promoted any form of dissidence, but it did instill in me the fact that we are on this earth to love and not hate, to oppose violence, oppose war, to try to reconcile people, to be good people, in other words, not to seek wealth, but to live very simply, it's in the Beatitudes, it's in the Sermon on the Mount. This all had a very deep influence on me, even though the church, the Catholic Church within which I grew up, was saying the opposite at the same time it was teaching all of this. So for me, it's I really can't do any other. I can't turn away. I'm not saying I do this every single minute of the day. I try to enjoy life because life is a gift, and we're on this earth to enjoy ourselves also. So it's a dual part of me, and I think it should be two things for everyone. They should look closely at this. One of my intellectual heroes is Albert Camus, who said, he's always tried to serve beauty and the oppressed at the same time. And I think that's a good motto. We need beauty, we need art, we need music, we need joy, we need all of that. We need beauty, we need a connection to nature, but at the same time, we have to defend. We have to defend the least powerful people, the oppressed, the people who are being killed and tortured and have no food and are being driven from here to there all across the world as migrants and people who've lost their homes. So it's for me, but not for everyone. It has that religious, or I would say spiritual, source for me.
Well, I was really in my 60s when I went to Jeju Island the first time. I thought I was just going there to make a short 15, 20-minute film documenting what I had heard was a 6 or 7 year daily protest in Kangjong village against the construction of this massive naval base to accommodate Obama's pivot to Asia. And I spent a month with these people. I lived amongst them. I was with them every day for their protests. They were getting arrested, blocking cement trucks going into this base area, sometimes 50, 60 cement trucks a day. And people would lie down. They would chain themselves. They would sit in front of the gate. And then a meal was served at lunch because they never left their post. And the meal was prepared by others who were serving in their own way, using their own skills, whatever it is. And then every evening, they had a community gathering in this peace center, they called it, where all of these activists, and when I was there were 50 or 60 of them, many from other countries. And they would share their experiences of the day, and then they would dance and sing. I couldn't deal with it, Ed. I had seen this violence all day long. I'd seen this passion and this commitment from these people. And then at night, singing and dancing every single night that I was there. It was very emotional.
Yeah.
And then I learned about the atrocity committed at the hands of the United States military government in Korea immediately after the war and before the Korean conflict as we know it, where as many as 40 to 50,000 innocent peasants were massacred because they resented and rose up against the American government, military government, thinking they were free again. And I say at the end of that film, and this was an epiphany for me, it was a transitional moment in my life. I say at the end of the film, going to Jeju, I found my voice. And with voice comes responsibility. And that's been basically what has happened to me over these last years. I felt this tremendous responsibility, which I've never felt before, to, as you have, search for truth and to share in my way with my filmmaking the truth as I have discovered it. And I don't know if it takes an epiphany like that, some powerful moment of awakening or awareness, but that was my epiphany. That's the first time in my life that I clearly saw the history and the true history and nature of the United States government. Anyway.
Yeah, well, if I should say, your film is should be required viewing by everyone, everyone who's watching this, and everyone really in the world, because it is a revelation, an eye-opening film, and the Korean War and all that surrounds that Korean War and U.S. policies in Korea is one of the really unknown subjects in American history. People have learned quite a bit about the Vietnam War. Of course, they have been indoctrinated about World War II. We won the war and all that crap, when it was the Soviet Union that really won the war. But your film is so important, and while I was mentioning Oliver Stone's work, but your work on a different level is profoundly important, and I think people should tune in. So let's make sure they do. Let's do something to help that along.
Well, I appreciate that, and I never made a penny off of anything I did. I begged, and many people supported my travel expenses, which were really significant when you travel down through the Pacific, as I have on 3 occasions, and to Russia. So in these last 10 or 11 years, that film, The Ghost of Jeju, has been translated by volunteers into 7 languages. Wow. Including Mandarin, Chinese, and Russian. People contacted me and said, people in my country need to see this film. So it was French, it was Spanish, it was Italian. And it was all done by volunteers. The Koreans did their own. The film had been seen all over Korea, not in movie theaters, but these activists took and shared it. And that was the rewarding thing for me, because I saw through that process of traveling across the country with it and other people sharing it multiple times. And I mean in churches, in small halls, in peace groups, that my voice was being heard, the voice that I found by going to Jeju. It's the same case for me now that I'm in Russia. I'm trying to be a voice speaking out and it's speaking out of the wilderness to try to help American people to see the truth about Russia and about their own country, and that Russia is not the enemy. Um, all right, I want to get back and have you talk a little bit more about this concept of evil that we're talking about. You state that evil is real. You know, there's a lot of people say, well, there's no heaven, there's no hell, there's no God, there's no devil. But I think anybody that looks back over the course of history, not American history, human history on the planet, evil has been there. Signs of evil have been there, evil deeds by people. But Americans, and I'm not talking about Europeans or anybody else now, they cannot seem to grasp the evil. And you write that they need their illusions. What do you mean by that? They need their illusions.
Well, I mean, they need their illusions. But let me, again, bring it back to a little bit to education. You said that when you went to college, you majored in history. When I went to college, I majored in the classics. So this was Greek and Latin, but not just the languages, but the literature. And if you learn from the Greeks and you learn from the Latin writers, you learn a great deal about the tragic nature of human life, and also about people's complicity in evil. You don't have to be a Bible thumping, Bible or thump any sacred book to realize that evil has always been here. You don't have to believe in God. You don't have to believe in heaven or hell. But if you look around the world and you can't see evil, then you're like Oedipus, who has rips his eyes out at the end of the play, because he's seen so much. He's seen so much into his own soul and into what happened to him and what he did as a consequence, and blah blah blah. But if you can't see it, you could be an atheist, you could be an agnostic, you could be a religious person. I don't think that's really the point. The point is, just look around. And there's evil everywhere. Not evil, but people doing evil things, because it springs from within the heart of human beings. And then if you look too, you see beautiful, beautiful, beautiful people doing wonderful good throughout the world, like the people that you saw on Jeju Island. And it's very moving to see. There are people doing that all over the world, and they're inspiring. They inspire me. Without the people doing that, what would we have? So the human heart is divided, and people can be pushed in one direction or another by social and political and economic forces. And we want people to move in the direction of good, not evil. It just seems so self-evident. People don't like the word. They don't like the word because, we've become a kind of like secular, consumerist, materialist society. And then everything gets blamed on genetics and social forces and so forth. But despite social forces, there are people who do the right thing. They don't commit evil deeds. And so I think the assault on human freedom, which has been going on big time in the United States for decades now, is a fundamental strategy of the ruling elites who do the evil, and they want to encourage people to believe they are not free to do otherwise, that they're determined by their genetics, by social forces, and so on and so forth. So the concept of freedom is fundamental, I think. And from my perspective, it's something that comes with birth and is our God-given gift. We are free. We are always free to say no. Always.
I started out by asking about illusions, and
yes,
I want to talk a little bit more about that.
Yeah,
because
yeah.
An illusion is the opposite of reality, and Americans are not capable or are not willing to face many realities that are happening in their country. The destruction of the social safety net, the tearing apart of the fabric of American culture, all that was good with it. They failed to look at, the decaying infrastructure. They failed to look at what's happening to our educational system. They failed to look at and deal with these now regular school shootings. They just keep happening. And so, in my opinion, Americans deal with that by, I think, shutting it out. They've been horrified. We were horrified, as you've written, about the JFK assassinations. We were horrified by 9/11. We were horrified by RFK's assassination, Martin Luther King, Malcolm X. These things were all horrible things that Americans are having to deal with, and I don't think they have. I think most Americans have preferred their illusions, distractions. You talked about consumerism, about shopping. I love sports. I grew up with sports. It's in my DNA. The Boston Red Sox are in my DNA. As much as I know it's a business, and it's a rough capitalist business, I can't help it. But Americans are going in record numbers, record attendance in all major sports: football, baseball, basketball, hockey, soccer. These stadiums are sold out. Americans are going to the movie theaters. Americans are glued to their telephones and to their televisions. And I think you will agree with me. All of this is part of the programming. I think, anyway, it's part of the programming of those people who are looking to destroy our humanity. What are your thoughts on that, Ed?
Well, I agree. I think it's all part of a strategy. Let me just go back to your original question, which I forgot to answer before, about illusions. The word illusions comes from the word ludere, and the word ludere means to play. And the word delusion also comes from, if you're deluded or illuded, it has something to do with play, but not in the good sense of play. And you mentioned sports, Hollywood entertainment, and so forth, is surely a major distraction for Americans. Like you, sports is, in deep within me. I'm a former college basketball player, as I've mentioned to you before, and basketball especially. I love basketball. And have been playing it my whole life. It's just playing, going out on a basketball court and playing. is such a pure joy to me, because when I do it, I am in the moment totally. Everything else disappears. And it's not, of course, I want to play well, but it's not about really in winning and losing at this point in my life. I mean, it was at one point. But I noticed something very interesting about myself recently. I was watching some basketball games, and I found that if the players that I liked or the team didn't do well, I felt down afterwards. I felt a little depressed. And so I asked myself, I said, why am I feeling this? And I realized I'm falling into a trap, a bigger trap. And the bigger trap is there's a lot of things. Well, take the basketball. I cannot control how a player that I'm watching in a game performs. I have no control over it. I can watch, I can appreciate, I can hope that the person or the team does well, but I have no control over it. So why would I get depressed? Why have I involved myself so deeply at a level that when the game is over, it affects me so? It shouldn't. It shouldn't. At least this is what I think. But I think that the American people, they have all of these sports that they are heavily invested in. And sports are illusions. They're not, it doesn't matter what happens in a baseball game, a hockey game, or a basketball game. It's just, it's a game. It's a game. So why be so heavily psychologically invested in my team, this kind of stuff? Like, people refer to their teams as we, like, well, we lost. Like, we did? No. We didn't. You weren't on the team. You didn't lose, or you didn't win. But it draws us so deeply in sports. And the movies have the same effect. I'm not talking about serious movies. I'm talking about the lightweight stuff, the stupid stuff that is churned out in Hollywood all the time. These space movies and all this garbage. It's just so much garbage. So I think these are distractions, and they're meant to be. They keep people churned up all the time. It's like listening to the weather reports. It's a total distraction. It's all about, this disaster's coming, that disaster's coming, and it keeps people worked up, but they can't control the weather. You can't control the weather. What you can control, though, is what your country is doing, or you can try to control it. Maybe we can't control that either. Maybe it's totally out of control. But we can raise our voices and say, hey, this has to stop. This has to stop. We can't do that with this other stuff. So I think people's psychological and spiritual energy is placed in the wrong place. But it keeps them busy, and it works. It works.
Want to go back to the leaders of this country, and you also wrote in this article, look back as far as you can to past United States presidents, the figureheads who quote unquote act under orders, in parentheses, whose orders, as did Ahab in his lust to kill the evil great white whale. And what do you see? You see servile killers in the grip of a sinister power. I love this. You see hyenas with polished faces. You see pasteboard masks. This is an incredible, brilliant piece of writing.
Well, thanks for saying that. That's just the way it is, I think. I think these presidents, these leaders, they're just, they think they're in charge, but they're being jerked around at a deep level by bigger forces, and they carry out the orders. They're all, let's say, Lieutenant Callies at My Lai, and there are bigger forces out there who are telling them, you must do this, you must do that. I'm not saying they're not responsible. Of course, they're responsible. I mean, if you look at these people, if you look at President Biden, it's hard not to laugh at this guy. If you look at Trump, it's hard not to laugh. You look at Obama, he's as slick as they come, and a killer at heart. What he did in Syria, what he did in Libya, and so forth, and just the love of killing people with drones, every Tuesday. And then you have George W. Bush. I mean, you could see the strings being pulled on his top of his head, and Slick Willie, Clinton, and then George H.W. Bush, the former head of the CIA, for whom the building is named, even though he was the director for 1 year. That tells you a hell of a lot. Then Ronald Reagan reading, we could go just down the list, reading off cue cards because he doesn't know what to say. And someone's handing him, say this, say this, say this. And he's looking at the index cards to see what to say. They're all actors. Reagan was the acting president, and they're all now actors. They always have been. Sometimes, once in a while, there was a real human being there. I think the last president we had that was a real human being was John Kennedy. John Kennedy. I'm skipping over Jimmy Carter, who I think in his years after the presidency has done a lot of good things. But I can't say that as president he did much good at all. But it's a puppet theater. It's a puppet theater. But again, people are puppets too. And I think Shakespeare was right. All the world's a stage. And you have to learn how to be a real, genuine actor, not a cartoon character.
Well, I want to summarize this really fascinating conversation, Ed. I think it's too much to bear for Americans to accept the truth. It would challenge everything they know. It would challenge their worldview. It would challenge the view that they have of their country as an evil, demonic nation and force around the world, not a force for good. And the hardest, I think, to accept is that it would change the view that they have of themselves. And I think that is really why it's so difficult. You mentioned Biden, and I'm going to conclude on this note because it was really the title of the article that you just wrote and sent to me today. It was entitled, Facing Clear Evidence of Peril in a Country of Lies. And then with Joe Biden, we are facing clear evidence of peril because the neocons and his administration in particular have taken us to the very edge, a razor-thin edge of nuclear war. Ed, your final thoughts.
Well, I think that's absolutely correct. And for all the propaganda aimed at Russia and President Putin, that is simply propaganda. The United States has been pushing and pushing and pushing, breaking every treaty down through the years, withdrawing from every treaty, putting weapons into all the NATO countries surrounding Russia. Just this past week, the British, who are our lapdogs, said they were sending to the Ukrainian government depleted uranium weapons to be used against Russian forces in Ukraine. And President Putin, in response, said, we are sending tactical nuclear weapons to Belarus. And this game is just getting pumped up and pumped up, but who's pumping it up? It's not the Russians, it's the American government. And it seems like they are possessed by some satanic force. Again, I don't mean that in a literal way, but what do they think they're doing? Where are they going with all of this? They've trapped themselves. Russia and China are not going to back down. Why should they? They're not going to back down. And so, who's going to blink first? And we're really on the edge. But that's a subject that most people, I know, I've been warning about it since the 1960s. That's one of my first academic subjects that I studied and wrote about in graduate school. And it hasn't happened yet, but that doesn't mean it can't happen. And we are very close to, what did you say, 30 seconds to midnight in your wonderful film. We're very close to it now. And it's very frightening, but people don't want to talk about it. It's just too much for them.